The deafening roar of Allied bombers thundered across the gray October sky above Akmer Airfield, 1944. Beneath the concrete bunkers, Hauptmann Klaus Weber pressed his trembling hands against the cold metal of the Messerschmitt Me-262's fuselage. At 23, he had already buried more friends than most men would lose in a lifetime. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, climbing into a machine that killed its own pilots as efficiently as it destroyed enemy aircraft. The revolutionary jet fighter sat gleaming in the dim hangar light, its sleek profile promising salvation for a crumbling Reich. But Weber knew the terrible arithmetic that haunted every Me-262 squadron. For every 10 minutes this magnificent beast spent in combat, another pilot would never return home. The engines, temperamental and prone to catastrophic failure, had already claimed his wingman Hans just 2 days prior. Not to enemy fire, but to a sudden flameout that sent the aircraft plummeting into the Bavarian countryside. Weber's hands shook as he adjusted his leather gloves, remembering Hans's final radio transmission, a calm, resigned, "Tell my mother I tried." The irony was suffocating. Germany had created the world's first operational jet fighter, a technological marvel that could outrun any Allied aircraft, yet its own pilots faced a deadly lottery every time they took to the skies. The fuel lines were unreliable, the engines caught fire without warning, and the landing speeds were so high that even experienced pilots often didn't survive touchdown. As air raid sirens wailed across the base, Weber realized that today's mission might be his last. The question wasn't whether the Me-262 could change the war's outcome, it was whether he would live long enough to find out. Weber's memories drifted to the spring of 1943, when he first heard whispers of Willy Messerschmitt's revolutionary project. Back then, flying the reliable Bf-109, he had been among Germany's elite, a seasoned pilot with 17 confirmed kills and the Iron Cross gleaming on his chest. The war still felt winnable, and the Luftwaffe maintained its reputation as an unstoppable force. But everything changed when Oberst Heinrich Baer pulled him aside after a particularly brutal dogfight over the Channel. "Klaus," Baer had said, his weathered face grave with secrets, "they're developing something that will make every propeller-driven aircraft obsolete. But they need pilots who can handle complications." The colonel's hesitation should have been Weber's first warning. The early test flights at Rechlin were nothing short of miraculous. The Me-262's twin UMO-004 engines propelled the aircraft at speeds that defied comprehension, over 500 miles per hour, faster than anything the Allies possessed. Weber remembered his first flight, the intoxicating rush of leaving a formation of P-51 Mustangs standing still in the sky. For those brief moments, he felt like he was piloting the future itself. But the miracle came with a blood price that haunted every pilot in the program. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Richter, Weber's closest friend since flight school, became the first casualty he witnessed personally. During what should have been a routine test flight, Richter's starboard engine exploded without warning, sending shards of turbine blades through the cockpit. Weber watched helplessly from the ground as the aircraft disintegrated, taking with it a man who had survived 3 years of combat, only to be killed by his own machine. The pattern became sickeningly familiar. Lieutenant Müller died when both engines flamed out simultaneously during takeoff. Hauptmann Fischer perished when a fuel line rupture turned his cockpit into an inferno. Feldwebel Kruger never even made it off the ground. A compressor failure during engine startup sent metal fragments tearing through the fuselage like shrapnel. Each funeral was attended by fewer pilots as the survivors began to understand the true cost of their technological advantage. By late 1944, the situation had become desperate. Allied bombing raids were systematically destroying German fuel production, leaving the Me-262 units with synthetic fuel that clogged the delicate jet engines. The UMO-004s, designed to last 25 hours between overhauls, were now failing after just 10 hours of operation. Pilots began referring to their aircraft as flyende Särge, flying coffins. Weber remembered the briefing where Oberst Steinhoff, his face bearing the scars of his own Me-262 crash, delivered the brutal statistics. Of the first 50 pilots assigned to the Me-262 program, only 12 remained operational. The rest were dead, critically injured, or had suffered complete nervous breakdowns. Yet somehow, impossibly, they continued flying. The psychological toll was perhaps worse than the physical danger. These men had been selected as Germany's finest aviators, but the Me-262 reduced them to test pilots for an experimental weapon that killed indiscriminately. Weber watched proud veterans break down in tears before missions, knowing that each flight might be their last, not because of enemy action, but because of mechanical failure. The most devastating moment came when Weber learned that his younger brother Heinrich had been selected for Me-262 training. Heinrich was 19, barely finished with basic flight school, and completely unprepared for the psychological warfare of flying a machine that turned every mission into Russian roulette. Weber tried to intervene, using every connection he had, but the Luftwaffe's desperation overruled family bonds. Before we continue with this gripping historical account, take a moment to comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching this story unfold. Are you joining us from Berlin, New York, Tokyo, or somewhere else entirely? We love connecting with history enthusiasts from around the globe. The weight of these memories pressed down on Weber as he prepared for what would become the most crucial mission of his life. Every rivet, every switch, every gauge in the Me-262's cockpit represented not just German engineering prowess, but the sacrifice of pilots who had paid the ultimate price to make this moment possible. The question that haunted him wasn't whether he could complete the mission, it was whether he would survive long enough to honor their memory. The Me-262 program's expansion in late 1944 created an impossible paradox that tore at the heart of every squadron. While Allied forces advanced on multiple fronts, the Luftwaffe's most advanced weapon was killing its own pilots faster than enemy fire ever could. Weber found himself caught between two irreconcilable loyalties, his duty to the Reich and his responsibility to the young men under his command. The breaking point came during a heated confrontation with Oberst Galland, the legendary fighter ace who had been appointed to lead the Me-262 units. In the smoky briefing room at Brandenburg-Brest, surrounded by maps marked with red crosses indicating crashed aircraft, Weber made a decision that would brand him a traitor in some circles and a hero in others. "Sir, with respect," Weber interrupted during a mission briefing, his voice cutting through the room's tension, "we're sending boys to their deaths in machines that aren't ready for combat. Heinrich Müller died yesterday not from enemy bullets, but because his engine disintegrated on takeoff. That's the 7th pilot we've lost this month to mechanical failure alone." Galland's eyes flashed with a mixture of rage and something that looked dangerously close to relief. For months he had been fighting his own war against the high command, arguing for more time to perfect the aircraft's systems. But Hitler's demands for immediate deployment had overruled engineering prudence, creating a nightmare scenario where Germany's technological advantage was neutralized by its own impatience. "You think I don't know the cost?" Galland's voice was barely controlled fury. "Every name on that casualty list burns in my memory. But we're not fighting for perfection anymore, Weber. We're fighting for survival. Every day those B-17s continue their bombing runs, we lose more than pilots. We lose any chance of saving what's left of Germany." The room fell silent as Weber processed the terrible mathematics of their situation.
The Allies were producing aircraft faster than Germany could shoot them down, even with the Me-262's superior performance. But the jet fighter program was consuming its own pilots at an unsustainable rate, creating a death spiral that would ultimately leave the skies empty of defenders. It was then that Weber made his fateful decision. That night, he began secretly documenting the true casualty rates, the mechanical failures, and the impossible demands being placed on undertrained pilots. His plan was simple, but treasonous: create an accurate record that could be used to either reform the program or, if necessary, shut it down before it consumed an entire generation of Germany's finest aviators. His clandestine network began with his mechanic, Feldwebel Franz Hoffmann, a grizzled veteran who had maintained aircraft since 1935. Hoffmann had watched the Me-262's evolution from promising prototype to death trap, and his detailed maintenance logs told a story that the official reports carefully omitted. Together, they began collecting evidence of systemic failures that were being covered up by desperate commanders. The conspiracy expanded when Lieutenant Erich Steiner, barely 21 and fresh from training, approached Weber after witnessing his third engine failure in a week.
Steiner's hands still shook from his emergency landing, and his aircraft bore scorch marks from an engine fire that had nearly killed him. But instead of requesting transfer, he asked to join Weber's documentation effort. "They told us we were the future of German aviation," Steiner whispered during a midnight meeting in the bombed-out hangar. "But every mission feels like suicide. If we don't record what's really happening, who will remember the men we're losing? Who will learn from their sacrifice?" The network grew to include Dr. Maria Lindemann, a civilian engineer who had been transferred to the Me-262 project from Messerschmitt's design team. Dr. Lindemann brought a different perspective. She understood the technical problems that were killing pilots and had been systematically ignored when she proposed solutions. Her engineering reports, combined with Weber's operational observations, painted a devastating picture of a program driven by political desperation rather than military logic. The turning point came when Weber received devastating news. His brother Heinrich had been killed during his third Me-262 mission. The official report listed enemy action, but Weber's investigation revealed the truth. Heinrich's aircraft had suffered a catastrophic engine failure during combat, leaving him defenseless against pursuing P-51 Mustangs. The cover-up was complete, designed to maintain morale and avoid questions about the program's viability. If you're finding this incredible true story as gripping as we are, please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers and bring you more incredible historical accounts like this one. Your support helps us continue uncovering these amazing stories of courage and sacrifice. Standing over his brother's grave in the small cemetery outside Akmar, Weber made a vow that would define the remainder of his war. He would continue flying the Me-262, but he would also continue documenting its true cost. If the program couldn't be reformed, then history would at least remember the men who died trying to make it work. The war was nearly over, but the battle for truth had just begun. The conspiracy Weber had created represented something unprecedented in Nazi Germany, a group of loyal soldiers who chose honor over obedience, truth over propaganda. But as Allied forces closed in and desperation mounted, Weber realized that his documentation project had become something far more dangerous than simple record-keeping. It had become evidence of systematic failure that could doom everyone involved. December 15, 1944. The final massive Allied bombing raid approached Berlin as Weber strapped himself into his Me-262 for what he knew would be the mission that would either vindicate or destroy everything he believed about the aircraft. Intelligence reported over 800 B-17 flying fortresses escorted by 400 P-51 Mustangs, the largest daylight formation the Allies had ever assembled. For the first time, an entire squadron of Me-262s would engage in coordinated combat, their technological superiority finally given a chance to prove itself. But as Weber taxied toward the runway, His radio crackled with a transmission that shattered his world. "Klaus, this is Heinrich Base. We have discovered unauthorized documentation in your quarters. You are ordered to return immediately for questioning." The voice belonged to SS Oberfuhrer Kessler, the political officer who had been investigating defeatist activities within the Luftwaffe. Weber's blood ran cold. They had found his records, months of carefully documented evidence proving the Me-262's deadly flaws. Worse, they had probably identified every member of this network. Dr. Lindemann, Steiner, Hoffmann, all of them now faced charges of treason that carried only one sentence: death. In that moment, Weber faced an impossible choice. He could abort the mission, return to base, and accept execution alongside his co-conspirators. Or he could continue with the mission, knowing that his friends were likely already under arrest, and try to prove that the Me-262 could work, that their sacrifice had meaning. The decision was made for him when enemy formations appeared on the horizon like a vast cloud of metal locusts. Abandoning his squadron now would mean certain death for hundreds of Allied aircrew, but it would also leave 12 other Me-262 pilots to face overwhelming odds. Weber's hands moved to the throttles with practiced precision, pushing the UMO 004 engines to maximum power. "All aircraft, this is Weber. Engage at will. Remember, we're not just fighting for Germany today. We're fighting for every pilot who died trying to make these machines work." The initial attack was everything the Me-262's designers had promised.
Weber's aircraft screamed through the bomber formation at nearly 600 miles per hour, his cannons tearing apart two B-17s in a single pass. For those brief, glorious seconds, the technological superiority was undeniable. No propeller-driven aircraft could match their speed or firepower. But then the inevitable began happening. Lieutenant Steiner's starboard engine exploded in a shower of turbine fragments, sending his aircraft into an uncontrollable spin. Weber watched helplessly as his young protege fought to maintain control, his radio transmissions growing increasingly desperate before cutting off entirely. The crash site would later reveal that Steiner had managed to steer his dying aircraft away from a village, sacrificing any chance of survival to protect civilians below. One by one, the Me-262s began falling, not to enemy fire, but to the mechanical demons that had haunted the program from its inception. Hauptmann Mueller's fuel lines ruptured, filling his cockpit with flammable vapors that ignited when he tried to restart his engines. Oberfeldwebel Schmidt's aircraft simply disintegrated when both engines failed simultaneously during a high-speed climb. Weber found himself alone against impossible odds, his aircraft one of only 3 Me-262s still airborne from the original squadron of 12. But in that moment of devastating loss, something extraordinary happened. The remaining jets, despite their flaws, began systematically destroying Allied formations with a precision and effectiveness that stunned both sides. The brutal irony became clear. The Me-262 was simultaneously the most effective and most dangerous aircraft ever deployed. In 20 minutes of combat, Weber's squadron had destroyed 37 Allied aircraft, an unprecedented kill ratio that proved the jet fighter's revolutionary potential. But they had lost 9 of their own aircraft, 7 to mechanical failure rather than enemy action. As Weber engaged his final target, a formation of P-51 Mustangs that had somehow managed to match his altitude, his own port engine began showing signs of failure. The turbine temperature gauge climbed dangerously into the red zone, and he could hear the ominous whine that preceded catastrophic breakdown. He had perhaps minutes before the engine would either flame out or explode. In that moment, Weber made a decision that would haunt him forever. Instead of attempting to return to base, he used his remaining operational time to transmit his complete combat report via radio, not to German command, but on a frequency he knew Allied intelligence monitored. The technical specifications, the casualty rates, the exact nature of every mechanical failure, all of it broadcast in clear language that any engineer could understand. This is Hauptmann Klaus Weber, Me-262 pilot. His final transmission began. What you are hearing is the death song of German aviation. We created a weapon that could have changed history, but our impatience destroyed it.
Learn from our mistakes. The future belongs to those who perfect technology, not those who rush it into battle. His port engine exploded 30 seconds later, but Weber had already ejected, his parachute carrying him toward an uncertain future where his greatest victory had also become his ultimate betrayal. The aftermath of Weber's final mission created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. His radio transmission, intercepted by Allied intelligence and later by German monitoring stations, became the most damaging intelligence leak in Luftwaffe history. Within hours, Allied engineers possessed detailed technical specifications of the Me-262's weaknesses. But more importantly, they understood the psychological toll the program had taken on Germany's finest pilots. Weber survived his ejection only to find himself captured by advancing American forces near Brandenburg. His interrogation by Major Robert Patterson, a former Boeing engineer turned intelligence officer, revealed the full scope of the Me-262's tragic legacy. Patterson, who had worked on early American jet prototypes, understood immediately that Weber wasn't just a captured enemy pilot, he was a man traumatized by watching his country's technological miracle consume itself. "You built the future," Patterson told Weber during their third interrogation session, his voice carrying unexpected sympathy. "But you tried to deploy it before it was ready. Every aircraft program goes through this. The British lost dozens of test pilots developing their jets. The difference is, we could afford to wait. You couldn't." The intelligence gathered from Weber's documentation network proved devastating when combined with his combat report. Allied engineers realized that Germany's jet technology was simultaneously years ahead of their own and fatally flawed in implementation.
The UMO-004 engines, revolutionary in design, were being manufactured with substandard materials due to wartime shortages. Chromium and nickel, essential for high-temperature turbine blades, had been replaced with steel alloys that couldn't withstand the thermal stress of sustained operation. Dr. Maria Lindemann, who had been arrested but escaped execution due to Weber's intervention, later provided additional details during her post-war debriefing. Her engineering reports, smuggled out by sympathetic guards, revealed that German metallurgists had identified solutions to the engine problems as early as 1943, but wartime production demands prevented implementation of proper materials and manufacturing techniques. The human cost became even more staggering when complete records were assembled. Of the approximately 1,400 Me-262 aircraft produced, mechanical failures accounted for more pilot deaths than enemy action. The official casualty rate, heavily censored during the war, showed that Me-262 pilots had a 70% survival rate per mission, impressive compared to conventional fighters facing overwhelming Allied numbers, but devastating when mechanical failures were factored separately from combat losses. Weber's brother Heinrich became symbolic of an entire generation of pilots sacrificed to technological hubris. His official record listed 3 combat missions, but maintenance logs revealed he had attempted 7 takeoffs, 4 of which had resulted in aborted flights due to engine problems. His final mission succeeded only because ground crews had cannibalized parts from 3 other aircraft to make his Me-262 temporarily airworthy. The psychological profiles of surviving Me-262 pilots, compiled by Allied medical officers during post-war interviews, revealed unprecedented levels of what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Unlike conventional combat stress, which typically resulted from enemy action, Me-262 pilots suffered from a unique form of trauma caused by their own equipment. They had been trained to trust their machines absolutely, but the Me-262 violated that fundamental trust with every flight. Lieutenant Erich Steiner's story became particularly haunting when his personal journal was recovered from the crash site. His final entries described watching his aircraft's instruments during the moments before his fatal engine explosion, knowing exactly what was happening but being powerless to prevent it. "The temperature gauge climbs like a fever," he had written. "We know what comes next, but we keep flying because stopping means Germany dies a little more each day." Weber's own psychological transformation became evident during extended debriefings with Allied psychiatrists. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a pioneering aviation psychologist, documented his evolution from loyal German officer to someone she described as morally injured by technological betrayal.
Weber repeatedly expressed not anger at the Allies who had defeated Germany, but rage at the commanders who had rushed an imperfect weapon into service. The broader strategic implications became clear when Allied engineers examined captured Me-262 production facilities. German industry had achieved remarkable feats under impossible conditions, but the pressure to deploy immediately had prevented the methodical development process that successful aircraft required. Every shortcut taken to accelerate production introduced new failure modes that killed pilots. Perhaps most tragically, post-war analysis revealed that if Germany had delayed Me-262 deployment by just 6 months to address fundamental engineering problems, the aircraft could have achieved the performance and reliability its designers intended. The technological gap between Allied and German aviation would have been insurmountable, potentially changing the war's outcome. But Hitler's impatience for wonder weapons had transformed potential victory into guaranteed catastrophe. The personal cost to Weber's network of conspirators varied dramatically. Feldwebel Franz Hoffmann, the veteran mechanic, survived the war but never worked on aircraft again, stating that he had seen enough machines kill good men. Dr. Maria Lindemann emigrated to the United States, where her expertise in jet engine metallurgy contributed to early American jet development, ironically helping perfect the technology that Germany had pioneered but failed to master. Weber himself faced an impossible return to civilian life. His wartime experiences had created a man caught between worlds, too traumatized to forget what he had witnessed, too honest to accept the convenient myths that others constructed about German technological superiority. His extensive debriefing notes, later published as part of Allied intelligence summaries, became essential reading for post-war aviation development programs.
The Me-262's legacy extended far beyond its immediate military impact. Every modern jet aircraft incorporates lessons learned from its failures, not just technical lessons about engine design and materials, but human lessons about the importance of adequate testing, pilot training, and systematic development. The program's casualties became a cautionary tale taught in every aviation engineering program, a reminder that technological advancement without proper preparation inevitably becomes technological catastrophe. Weber's final insight, recorded during his last interview before repatriation, captured the program's ultimate tragedy. We proved that humans could fly faster than sound travels, but we forgot that humans also need time to learn how to survive the experience. The Me-262 didn't fail because the technology was wrong. It failed because we didn't give ourselves time to make it right. Every pilot who died was killed by our impatience, not by Allied bullets. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. 1,400 aircraft built, 300 lost to mechanical failure, 542 pilots killed or seriously injured in non-combat incidents. Germany's miracle weapon had become its own pilot's executioner. In the end, the Me-262 story became one of humanity's greatest technological achievements, shadowed by its most preventable tragedy. Weber's documentation, preserved in Allied archives, serves as an eternal reminder that innovation without wisdom, speed without safety, and ambition without patience inevitably leads to catastrophe. The young men who died in those revolutionary aircraft, Heinrich Weber, Erich Steiner, Ernst Richter, and hundreds of others, were not victims of enemy action, but casualties of a system that valued immediate results over human lives. Their sacrifice ultimately advanced aviation technology decades into the future, but at a cost that should never have been necessary. Yet from their tragedy emerged profound lessons that shaped modern aviation safety protocols. Every commercial airliner, every military jet, every spacecraft that flies today incorporates safety systems and testing procedures designed to prevent the kind of systematic failures that plagued the Me-262 program. Their deaths were not meaningless. They became the foundation upon which safer skies were built. Weber himself lived until 1987, spending his final decades as a technical consultant for aircraft manufacturers, ensuring that the mistakes of 1944 would never be repeated. His motto, carved on his gravestone, reads simply, "Technology serves humanity best when humanity takes time to perfect it." If these incredible stories of courage, sacrifice, and human resilience fascinate you as much as they do us, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We're dedicated to bringing you the untold stories of history's most remarkable people. What historical topic would you like us to explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. Until next time, remember, behind every technological marvel lies a human story worth telling.